told you it rattled. Well, I found the rattle. Let's go look at that. And this is your clutch basket out of that. And check this out. This thing has this part here is what attaches your clutch disc and gauge here. Transmits the pressure or the power through the clutch disc to the center hub that goes to your transmission. Well, outside here where the chain goes is what transmits the power to this. And this is a multi-piece setup that has a bunch of damper springs in it. Kind of like a clutch on a car. Well, pretty much exactly like a clutch on a car. Except that these frickin' springs, there is only one of them that's not just flopping all over the place. And I can't really see down in there, but I assume the spring is probably busted. Because this one here is like it should be. Solid against both sides. To where when it pivots, it compresses the spring and then springs back. So, that's where the rattle's coming from. And these also, the multi-pieces are held together with 3 rivets. They have been known to come apart. So, the solution, and what most of the racers did back when they were racing these, is they change it to an XL clutch basket that doesn't have the springs. Why in the hell they put the springs in these? Some people think this is a leftover Buell part they had. And it may be. I never had to have the clutch part on a Buell, but that kind of makes sense. So what I'm going to do is drill these rivets out. Since there's no chance of this going back together as is, I'm going to drill the rivets out, take it apart, and see if I can make it solid and put it back together as is. If I can't do anything with that, then we'll get all the parts to do an XL clutch conversion and just be done with it. Put the solid hub in there, because there's really no reason to have those. No good reason, at least, and especially since the racers could get by without it. It was even an AMA bulletin. It's like, if you're racing one of these, you can do all of this clutch mod and still race in the stock class or whatever the heck it is. But there's my rattle. I get that fixed one way or the other. Should be all good on everything on the bike, but that's annoying. I have got the rivets drilled out and this clutch basket taken apart. Now, I was a little surprised that none of the springs were broken, but they used like 3 different lengths of springs. The one fits in there tight, then they're a little bit sloppy, and then these other 2 are like super sloppy. And I don't really understand what their thinking was on that. Because, I mean, on a clutch disc in a car, all of the springs are the same. They're all tight in the hole. But what those springs do is this slot here where the spring go, lets it move back and forth to take up a little slot. Because the inner part is where your clutch discs go, transmit power to the transmission. The outer piece is your coming from your primary chain, and they lets them move independently of another. Like that. So your inner and your outer. I'm trying to do this one-handed. Every time I pick it up, I get it wedged where it won't turn. There we go. Yeah, they move independently of one another. Now the XL models do not do this. This piece is pressed into this piece. I don't know if there's anything else that retains it. I would figure there is, but it doesn't move independently of each other at all. So my options were to get an XL clutch setup. That is kind of cost prohibitive. Just this outer piece from Harley is like $450. Then you've got to buy the inner piece, and the clutch discs are different. And it's going to add up fast. I could probably throw $1,000 at this clutch. Easy. And if you go with an aftermarket basket, the price just goes up from there. So the only thing that is really wrong with this basket is this. So what we need to do is keep them from moving independently. So my first thought was possibly just weld this sucker together But I don't want to, that basket's kind of thin metal, I don't want to warp anything. So I do know that these rivets, and they have had trouble with the rivets breaking on something, causing it to come apart, they can be replaced with bolts. So there is enough room to put some like button head bolts and good quality bolts and bolt this thing together. But if you do that, you still got the movement. So what I think I'm going to do is bolt it together, but instead of springs, I'm going to turn some aluminum bar stock into round cylinders that are fit down in these pockets tightly. Be nice if it was like a light press fit down into the pockets. That will lock everything together this way, and then put all this back on and bolt it together so it's squeezed together this way, and it should be good to go. Because unless there was, and you know, another performance improvement, there's really no reason to bend this clutch and get a different one, because it works, as far as transmitting power, it works fine. It was just rattling. So I'm gonna get to the lathe and see what I can come up with. Okay, what I'm doing right here is turning this piece of bar stock down so it's the same diameter as the coil springs. And once I get that done, I will section it up into 6 slugs to fit in the hole, effectively locking that clutch basket in place. Okay, here is spacer number 6, parted off that piece of bar stock. So, since the ends of, no, too close. The ends of some of these holes are kind of tapered where the spring fit in. I cut the spacers just a touch long. I will just touch them up on the belt sander to where they're a slight press fit into the holes so nothing can move. And now I think it'll be good. Okay, so the 6 little slugs are in place. Just run them through the belt sander and tapered the ends so they'd fit in the hole, and now there is absolutely no twisty movement. So I drilled all these holes out, and then there's these little spacers that go in between to separate everything. I drilled these all out to 5/16 because the rivets were a little bit below that. So then I'll put this back on to retain the pieces. And I'm going to bolt it together with 5/16 bolts. Okay, we got a final product here. So all together, the spacers are in place. It's locked up tight. Replace the rivets with bolts, 5/16, 18, lots of red thread locker on those. Just went ahead and you put the shell back in, all the other pieces back in like normal. On the inside, use button head screws, and I wanted to keep them under the level that these stick up, so I had to take about 30 thousandths off the top of the heads, and that puts them about the same height as what the rivets were, so there shouldn't be any clearance issue. Now we don't rattle, so it should be good. Now, one thing I wanted to say is I did some more research, and these are a Buell clutch. This is a Buell clutch basket. So I'm thinking Harley was just finishing out some of the part bins when they were putting these XRs together. But I looked up some of the Buells. Looks identical to this, where the XLs and all are a different setup without the springs. And I didn't find too much about the rattle on the XR boards, but I found quite a bit looking up old Buell stuff. But unfortunately, nobody ever came up with any kind of solution that I could find. They were the same, and I don't think anybody ever took one apart like I did, but they were of the same opinion that looking at these springs, that some of them were broken. But that's simply not the case. You've got 3 different lengths of springs. You've got these little short ones with a where the wire is thicker. Then you have 3 that almost fit the hole properly, and then 1 that actually fits in there tight. So they apparently were trying to do a progressive damping effect, which I understand that may be a good idea, but you have to do something to keep them damn things from rattling. I don't know why neither of my Buells rattled, but some Buells that were same year, same model, they had rattling problems. So I don't have an answer to that, but we're going to try this. I'm going to go ahead and post this video before I actually have this back in the bike and actually run it, in case anybody sees anything that I've done seriously wrong before I get it all back together. But considering that the XL clutch basket eliminates all this spring stuff anyway, and they used an actual spring disc inside to kind of damp it, and most people take those out of the XL model because they come apart and break, so they just put an extra clutch disc in here, so no damping there either. So this should be fine. And the thing I like about it is that being that it is bolted together, it is completely reversible. I could put these springs right back in, and if I wanted, I actually thought about trying to build some little spacers to go on the springs so they didn't flop, but they were still in there and would work properly. So that's another option if this doesn't work. But if you got any thoughts on this, put them in the comments, let me know. I should be putting this, I've got my stator and my voltage regulator came in today, so I should be able to start putting this back together tomorrow. And as soon as I actually run it, I'll let you know how I like it.